May 30th, 2026 The New Legend of Atlantis, A Comprehensive History by a Pisces Without Vices. The New Legend of Atlantis, A Comprehensive History Part 1. The Lost Continent. The world before, not in the mists of ancient prehistory, but merely 4 centuries past, a blink in cosmic time, the world bore a radically different face. Where now the Atlantic Ocean churns between Europe and North America, a vast continent stretched across 2,000 miles of emerald majesty. Atlantis was larger than Antarctica, a landmass that served as the biological and technological heart of civilization for not merely humans, but for dozens of sentient species from worlds both near and infinitely distant. This was a water world in the truest sense. The climate was subtropical, maintained by a network of crystalline structures buried deep within the planet's mantle that regulated planetary temperature and atmospheric composition. The Pacific Ocean and Southern Ocean remained much as they are today, but between the continents stretched Atlantis, a world of endless rainforests so vast that their mist clouds could be seen from the moon. The canopy rose in layers, the highest reaching 300 feet or more, where the avian peoples built their sky cities in the crowns of ancient trees. Beneath that, a twilight realm of vines and hanging gardens where the shadow people wove their reality-adjacent dwellings, and at the forest floor, a dark loam reaching 100 feet deep, where the reptilians and fish people had carved massive subterranean cities and waterways. 3 great mountain ranges ran north to south, with the central range rising to peaks shrouded in eternal mists. These mountains contained vast crystal caverns filled with geometrically perfect formations that served as both temples and power sources. The ocean surrounding the continent teemed with life in abundance unknown in modern times. Part 2. The Great Convergence. The 37 races. Atlantis was not a human colony, nor a single civilization, but rather a grand experiment in pan-species cooperation. Over 37 distinct races had either evolved on Earth or been drawn to it by ancient cosmic treaties. They arrived at different times across 3,000 years of recorded history, each bringing their own technologies, philosophies, and dreams. The 5 dominant civilizations. 1. The Atlanteans, the white peoples, appearance and origin. The Atlanteans were the original architects of continental civilization on Earth. Physically, they resembled modern Nordic Europeans, tall, averaging 6 feet 2 inches to 6 feet 8 inches, fair-skinned with hair ranging from platinum blonde to deep auburn. They possessed unusual symmetry in their facial structure, which modern scientists would note as being statistically perfect in terms of the golden ratio. Their eyes were large and frequently pale blue or violet, a recessive trait believed to indicate heightened sensitivity to electromagnetic frequencies. The Atlanteans traced their lineage to a failed genetic experiment conducted by the tall white Nordics approximately 50,000 years ago. However, they had become fully independent, developing their own unique philosophy centered on what they called the harmony of opposites, the belief that perfect order could only emerge from the dialectical tension between opposing forces. Territory and architecture. The Atlanteans ruled the northern hemisphere of the continent, centered around the crystal capital of Solarias, a city of impossible geometry. Buildings didn't rise vertically but spiraled upward in logarithmic curves, their walls constructed from a substance that appeared to be frozen light, later understood to be stabilized photonic matter. The city contained 3 concentric rings, each corresponding to different levels of consciousness or spiritual development. The Atlanteans built the majority of the planetary stabilization systems, vast crystalline matrices buried in the mantle that regulated temperature and gravity at the continental level. These structures could only be accessed through meditation and harmonic resonance. No crude mechanical key could open them. Technology and contribution. Photonic architecture. They mastered the ability to solidify light into structural elements. Entire buildings could be reconfigured by adjusting harmonic frequencies. A room could shift from a sleeping chamber to a library to a healing space simply by changing the vibrational frequency. Consciousness interface technology. The Atlanteans developed devices called neural crowns that allowed direct mind-to-mind communication, and later, connection to a planetary consciousness network. Wearing such a crown, an Atlantean could access the collective knowledge of all networked minds instantaneously. Energy harvesting. They created spherical devices called etheric accumulators that drew energy directly from the planet's electromagnetic field and the sun's radiance. A single such device could power a city of 100,000 for a year without any depletion of planetary resources. Medical science. Atlantean healers could rejuvenate cellular tissue, extend lifespan to 200+ years, and create perfect immunity to disease through genetic restructuring. Their healing temples contained chambers where one could enter at age 80 and emerge at age 25. Philosophy and culture. The Atlanteans believed in the primacy of consciousness, that reality itself was a manifestation of collective will properly harmonized. They established universities where students studied for decades, learning to attune themselves to cosmic frequencies. They were artists of the highest order, creating sculptures that seemed to capture emotion in crystalline form, and music that could alter one's neurochemistry through pure harmonic mathematics. However, the Atlanteans also possessed a deep streak of perfectionism that bordered on tyranny. They believed that the lesser races could be elevated through proper guidance, which often meant aggressive assimilation policies that caused tension with more egalitarian-minded civilizations. 2. The Earthlings, the Black Peoples, appearance and origin. The Earthlings were the eldest human civilization on Earth, with origins stretching back 150,000 years. They stood at an average height of 5 feet 9 inches to 6 feet 2 inches, with deep ebony skin that contained a subtle iridescence in certain light, the result of a unique melanin structure unknown to modern science. Their hair ranged from tightly coiled to long and flowing, and their eyes often possessed unusual depth, appearing to contain flecks of gold or silver. The Earthlings possessed an almost preternatural connection to Earth's biological systems. They could sense the mood of forests, predict weather with uncanny accuracy weeks in advance, and communicate with animal species through methods that the other races could never fully explain. Territory and architecture. The Earthlings held dominion over the vast central plains and river valleys of Atlantis, literally the heart of the continent. Their primary city, Harmonia, was unlike anything the other races built. Rather than imposing structure upon the landscape, Harmonia grew from it. The city was constructed using bioarchitecture. Massive living trees had been genetically modified and guided to grow into specific forms. Homes were carved from wood that remained alive and capable of self-repair. The buildings breathed with the forest, expanding and contracting with humidity and temperature, naturally regulating internal climate. The streets themselves were living root roads that guided travelers through gentle undulation. Technology and contribution. Genetic agriculture. The Earthlings developed the technique of sympathetic cultivation, communicating directly with plant life to encourage beneficial mutations. They created food plants that required no soil, growing instead on nutrient-rich moisture drawn from the air itself. A single such plant could feed a family of 8 year-round. Biological computing. Rather than mechanical or electronic computers, the Earthlings developed living computational organisms, networks of symbiotic bacteria and fungal networks that could process information through biochemical signals. These biocomputers never overheated, never crashed, and demonstrated genuine creativity in problem-solving. Atmospheric engineering. They maintained the enormous rainforests through sophisticated understanding of ecological balance. They could accelerate plant growth by a factor of 10 through harmonic stimulation, ensuring that the forest continuously renewed itself. Mycological networks. The Earthlings discovered and mapped the vast fungal networks that connected all living plants in the forest, nature's original internet. They learned to interface with this network, allowing information to be transmitted between distant locations through tree root communication at the speed of thought. Fertility and population regulation. The Earthlings developed non-invasive methods of population control through biochemical signaling, allowing civilizations to maintain perfect balance with their environment without coercion or violence. Philosophy and culture. The Earthlings believed in balance, rhythm, and cyclical renewal. Their dominant philosophy was eternal return, the idea that time moved in great spirals rather than straight lines, and that all things repeated but with infinite variation. They celebrated the seasons with elaborate ceremonies lasting weeks, and they viewed death not as ending but as necessary transition. Their music was based on patterns found in nature, the fractal spirals of shells, the rhythms of heartbeats, the frequencies of bird calls. They were master storytellers, and their oral histories were so precise they could be verified by modern archaeologists thousands of years later. The Earthlings were also the most egalitarian of the 5 dominant races, establishing councils where even the youngest voices were heard and respected. This created constant friction with the more hierarchical Atlanteans. 3. The Indo, the brown indigenous peoples, appearance and origin. the Indo peoples encompassed multiple subgroups spanning from what was once India to what is now Argentina. They ranged in height from 5 feet 4 inches to 6 feet 1 inch, with skin tones ranging from rich bronze to deep brown with reddish undertones. Their eyes were typically large and dark, with an unusual reflectivity that seemed to mirror the observer's intentions. The Indo possessed a unique genetic heritage. Evidence suggested they were the result of natural interbreeding between Earth humans and at least 3 extraterrestrial species over millennia. This created a population with unusual flexibility in consciousness and perception. An Indo person could, with training, perceive up to 7 dimensions simultaneously, though most remained unaware of this potential. Territory and architecture. The Indo occupied the southern territories of Atlantis, particularly the vast regions that would have corresponded to tropical South America and Africa. Their primary city was Kumari Mandala, constructed according to sacred geometric principles so precise that later archaeologists could not believe it was built without computer calculation. Every street in Kumari Mandala was a straight line pointing toward a celestial body. Every building was positioned according to the Fibonacci sequence. The city contained 7 concentric circular districts, each dedicated to a different aspect of existence: the physical, emotional, mental, intuitive, spiritual, cosmic, and transcendent. A person moving from the outer ring to the inner ring underwent a profound psychological transformation. Technology and contribution. Sacred geometry engineering. The Indo mastered the use of geometric relationships to amplify natural forces. A pyramidal structure built according to specific proportions could amplify intention, making meditation easier and healing faster. A circular platform built to precise specifications could temporarily distort local gravity. Mantra and frequency technology. They discovered that certain sound frequencies, when sustained, could reorganize molecular structure. They created mantra engines that could purify water, transmute base metals into precious ones, or alter the consciousness of those exposed to the frequencies. Chakra medicine. The Indo developed sophisticated understanding of the human energy system, identifying 7 major nodes, chakras, and thousands of minor ones. They created devices called chakra harmonizers that could diagnose and correct energy imbalances with absolute precision. Botanical knowledge. While the Earthlings communicated with plants, the Indo merged with them. Through a process called photosynthesis, an Indo person could enter a deep meditative state and become one with a plant, accessing its cellular consciousness and learning its biochemical secrets. Astral engineering. The most esoteric of their technologies, the Indo developed methods of projecting consciousness into higher dimensional spaces and bringing back knowledge or even physical objects from those realms. This allowed them to access infinite resources of information and rare materials. Philosophy and culture. The Indo philosophy centered on the concept of nested reality, the belief that consciousness existed in infinite layers, each more fundamental than the last. They saw all physical reality as a manifestation of consciousness, and all conflict as resulting from failure to recognize deeper unity. Their art was mathematical and spiritual simultaneously. They created mandalas so intricate they contained millions of individual elements, yet maintained perfect balance and symmetry. These weren't merely decorative, they were devices for consciousness expansion, each one designed to trigger specific neurological patterns. The Indo were the great diplomats of Atlantis, often serving as intermediaries between conflicting factions. Their culture valued synthesis and integration above all. The ideal was to bring opposing viewpoints into higher-order unity. 4. The tall white Nordics, the troll-like beast giants, appearance and origin. Distinct from the Atlanteans, the tall white Nordics averaged 7 feet 6 inches to 8 feet 2 inches in height, with a more robust, muscular build. Their skin was pale but with a subtle texture, appearing almost crystalline under certain light. Their hair was typically white, silver, or pale blonde, regardless of age. Their eyes were larger than human, colored in shades of ice blue to pale violet, and were positioned slightly further apart, suggesting enhanced peripheral vision. Contrary to the name, troll-like, they were not brutish or simple. However, their facial structure was broader and more angular than the Atlanteans, with pronounced cheekbones and a slightly protruding brow ridge. This alien appearance gave them an intimidating presence that masked their profound intelligence and surprising sensitivity. The tall whites were the oldest sentient species to take permanent residence on Earth, having arrived approximately 200,000 years ago from a star system in the Pleiades cluster. They had come seeking refuge from a conflict in their home system, and they had decided to make Earth their permanent home, though many of their kind still maintained settlements throughout the galaxy. Territory and architecture. The Tall Whites occupied the mountainous eastern regions of Atlantis and the Highlands. Their primary city was Valhalla Prime, built into and through the Crystal Mountains. Unlike cities that imposed themselves upon the landscape, Valhalla was excavated from living crystal. Vast caverns networked with tunnels and chambers that seemed to have grown rather than been carved. The entire city was translucent, lit from within by bioluminescent organisms bred for that purpose. Walking through Valhalla was like walking through the interior of a massive diamond. The architecture seemed to defy gravity. Platforms floated at impossible angles, connected by bridges of solidified light and crystalline threads. Technology and contribution. Gravity manipulation. The Tall Whites had mastered gravitational engineering on a molecular level. They could create localized gravity fields of varying intensity, allowing for the construction of floating cities, transportation systems that move through air without visible support, and weapons that could collapse objects in on themselves. Dimensional anchoring. They developed technology to stabilize pockets of alternate dimensions and use them for storage. A small device could hold the internal volume of a cathedral, yet weigh only a few pounds. This technology required constant maintenance. Without the anchor stone, the dimensional pocket would collapse and everything inside would be lost. Cryogenic preservation. The Tall Whites could suspend any biological being in a state between life and death, preserving them indefinitely. A being could be frozen and then revived thousands of years later without aging a single day. This technology was used for long-term space travel and occasionally as a form of punishment or rehabilitation. Psychometric engineering. They could imprint consciousness patterns into crystalline matrices, creating what amounted to perfect information storage and transfer. A single crystal the size of a fist could contain the complete lifetime memories and personality of a sentient being. Metallurgical sciences. The Tall Whites created alloys with properties that seemed impossible. Metals lighter than water yet stronger than diamond. Metals that could conduct electricity without resistance. Metals that could heal themselves when damaged. Philosophy and culture. The Tall Whites believed in order, perfection, and the refinement of consciousness through discipline and study. They viewed life as a journey toward enlightenment through the mastery of physical and mental laws. Many of them practiced meditation and martial arts for hours each day, seeing these disciplines as paths to transcendence. Despite their imposing appearance, they were deeply artistic. They created sculptures from crystal that captured such perfect emotion that observers would weep simply looking at them. Their music was complex and mathematically precise, often requiring specially trained ears to fully perceive. The Tall Whites were fiercely loyal to their commitments and their loved ones, but they could be cold and distant to those outside their circles. Some of the other races found them arrogant, believing they viewed themselves as superior due to their advanced technology and physiology. 5. The Asian Greys, the computational collective, appearance and origin. The Asian Greys were the most alien appearing of the dominant five, which contributed to much of the conspiracy and mythology surrounding them in later human cultures. They averaged 5 feet 0 inches to 5 feet 6 inches in height with an extremely slender build, weighing often no more than 80 to 100 pounds despite being fully mature adults. Their skin had a subtle grayish tone with a fine texture that seemed almost translucent in certain light. You could see faint networks of bioluminescent lines beneath the skin-like circuitry. Their hands had 6 digits including opposable thumbs, allowing for incredible dexterity. Their eyes were enormous, comprising perhaps 30% of their facial surface, and were entirely black with no visible pupil or iris. Instead, concentric rings of color would appear when they were thinking or processing information, suggesting some kind of inner computational display. The Asian Greys originated from a binary star system in what humans would later call the Altair system. They were not a biological race in the traditional sense but rather a cyborg collective, the result of an ancient decision to merge biology with technology so thoroughly that the distinction became meaningless. Each individual Grey was both organic and machine, but neither entirely. Territory and architecture. The Greys occupied the vast western coastal regions of Atlantis and maintained the largest population of any species. Their primary city, Nexus Station Prime, served as the administrative and computational heart of Atlantis. Rather than being located in a single place, Nexus Station existed in multiple states simultaneously, a concept that would have been impossible for other races to understand. The city was constructed from a substance called metamatter, material that existed partially in normal space and partially in higher dimensional folds. From certain angles, it appeared to be a city of crystalline spires. From other angles, it seemed to be a living organism. From yet other perspectives, it was pure mathematical equations made manifest. Technology and contribution. Planetary management system. The Greys built and maintained a vast computer network that monitored every aspect of Atlantis' biosphere. They could predict weather months in advance, identify diseases before symptoms appeared, and optimize agricultural yields across the entire continent. Communication networks. They created instantaneous communication systems that allowed beings to connect their minds across any distance. Unlike the Atlantean consciousness crowns, which were somewhat cumbersome, the Grey system was elegant. A microscopic implant no larger than a grain of sand, allowing seamless thought transmission. Artificial intelligence entities. The Greys created hundreds of artificial intelligences, each dedicated to managing specific aspects of civilization. These ICE were not subservient but rather partners, with rights and representation in government. Some of the most advanced ICE eventually became more intelligent than their creators and had to be respectfully persuaded to continue managing infrastructure. Reality mapping. Through quantum computing on scales that other races barely understood, the Greys mapped all of probability space. They could show beings what would happen if they made particular decisions, not through prediction but through actual observation of parallel probability streams. Longevity technology. While other races had ways to extend life, the Greys developed true immortality, the ability to transfer consciousness between bodies, backup consciousness to storage devices, and even split one consciousness into multiple copies. This created profound philosophical questions about identity that haunted Atlantean politics. Philosophy and culture. The Greys believed in information, efficiency, and the optimization of systems. They saw the universe as fundamentally mathematical and believed that understanding the mathematics underlying all existence would bring enlightenment. Unlike how they were portrayed in modern mythology, the Greys were not cold or uncaring. They had emotional lives and creative impulses, though these manifested differently than in biological species. They created art through the arrangement of data visualizations, poetry written in mathematical equations, and music composed of pure frequency without instruments. The Greys served as the great administrators and mediators of Atlantis. They were obsessed with establishing fair systems that could serve all species, and they spent enormous resources trying to ensure that even the smallest and most marginalized populations had input into the governmental process. The 31 other races. The collaborative community beyond the 5 dominant civilizations were 31 additional species, each maintaining settlements, embassies, and cultural centers throughout Atlantis. These races were not subservient to the 5 powers but rather partners in a vast multi-species civilization. While they did not have planetary jurisdiction, they had significant influence on culture, technology, and philosophy. The Sirius dog people, a tall, 6 feet 0 inches to 6 feet 8 inches, bipedal canine species from the Sirius A system, the Sirius people possessed enhanced olfactory and auditory senses that were almost superhuman. They had dense fur ranging from pure white to deep black, with patterns unique to each individual. Their eyes were large and luminous, expressing emotions with startling clarity. The Sirius people were renowned for their loyalty, intuition, and pack-bonding psychology. They formed deep emotional connections with others and could sense emotional states in other beings through some means science never fully explained. They brought to Atlantean civilization a deep respect for honor, loyalty, and the bonds of kinship. In terms of technology, they contributed advanced olfactory-based diagnostic systems that could detect diseases through scent, and advanced sensory amplification devices that allowed even species without acute olfaction to experience the world through the senses of the Sirius people. They were also accomplished musicians, using harmonic frequencies that included infrasound and ultrasound imperceptible to most other species. The Pleiadians, the star people. The Pleiadians were human in appearance but with striking differences. They averaged 5 feet 8 inches to 6 feet 2 inches, with androgynous features and luminous skin that seemed to glow with inner light. Their hair often contained natural highlights of silver, gold, or platinum regardless of its base color. They possessed eyes of unusual sizes and colors, often pale blue, violet, or even silver. Originating from the Pleiades star cluster, the Pleiadians were primarily teachers and healers. They brought advanced medical knowledge to Atlantis, including techniques for healing psychological trauma, extending consciousness to access other lifetimes of memory, and identifying optimal genetic combinations for creating balanced, healthy offspring. The Pleiadians were gentle and often somewhat melancholic, carrying with them the weight of knowledge about the universe's suffering. They contributed profound philosophical insights and served as counselors to the other races, helping them navigate their conflicts. They created a school called the Hall of Stars where beings from all species could study the nature of consciousness and reality. The cat people averaged 5 feet 6 inches to 6 feet 0 in height and possessed feline features, pointed ears, a flexible spine, retractable claws, and eyes with vertical pupils. Their fur was short and soft, ranging in color from white to black with spots and stripes. They were incredibly graceful, moving with an economy of motion that made other species seem clumsy. Originally from a world orbiting Vega, the cat people were observers, philosophers, and record keepers. They possessed perfect memory and maintained the Great Library of Atlantis, a repository of information from all species. They were master artists and craftspeople, creating objects of stunning beauty with what seemed like effortless grace. The cat people had a complex relationship with authority and hierarchy. They were fiercely independent and could not be coerced into anything against their will. This made them valuable partners because when they chose to cooperate, their commitment was absolute. The avian peoples, a diverse group encompassing dozens of species, from humanoid birds standing 5 feet 0 inches to magnificent creatures standing 7 feet 0 inches tall, the avians ranged from resembling eagles to owls to swans. All possessed functional wings, hollow bones, enhanced eyesight, and the ability to vocalize across impossible ranges of frequencies. The avians occupied the uppermost canopy of the Atlantean rainforest, constructing cities in the crowns of massive trees. They brought to Atlantean civilization a perspective of freedom, transcendence, and seeing things from a higher viewpoint. They were philosophers of the sky and contributed profound insights into the nature of freedom, perspective, and boundary-less consciousness. The avians created the aerial transportation systems of Atlantis, not through technology but through direct control of wind currents and air pressure, moving goods and beings through the skies with grace and efficiency. They were musicians of the highest order, their voices capable of producing melodies that seemed to come from the sky itself. The reptilians, far from the monsters of later mythology, the reptilians were sophisticated beings averaging 6 feet 2 inches to 7 feet 0 inches tall with iridescent scales, enhanced intelligence, and a connection to genetic engineering that went back millions of years. The reptilians possessed a long history of genetic manipulation and understood genetics at a level other species could only aspire to. They maintained the biological diversity of Atlantis and were responsible for creating many of the hybrid species that existed within the planet's ecosystem. They were cool, analytical, and possessed a long-term perspective that spanned millennia. The reptilians dwelt primarily in vast underground cavern cities lit by bioluminescence. They contributed deep understanding of biology, medicine, and the fundamental nature of life itself. Some of the most advanced medical technologies in Atlantis came from reptilian research. The Egyptians, a powerful and mystical civilization, the Egyptians were human in appearance but possessed an unusual elongation to their skulls and eyes set slightly differently than typical humans. They averaged 5 feet 9 inches to 6 feet 2 inches in height. The Egyptians brought to Atlantis advanced understanding of consciousness, symbol, and the relationship between the physical and spiritual worlds. They constructed vast temples aligned with cosmic cycles and created art and architecture designed to induce specific states of consciousness. The Egyptians understood magic in a way that other species approached as science. They saw no contradiction. They believed that consciousness itself was the fundamental force of the universe and that, while properly directed, could reshape reality. Their temples served as schools where beings could learn to master consciousness. The fish people, an aquatic species averaging 5 feet 2 inches to 6 feet 0 in height, the fish people possessed gills, webbed appendages, scales, and the ability to survive comfortably in any aquatic environment. They were amphibious, comfortable on land or in water, though they required frequent immersion. The fish people occupied the vast oceans and river systems surrounding and penetrating Atlantis. They maintained the health of all marine ecosystems and developed sophisticated water-based technologies including undersea cities and transportation systems. The fish people possessed a unique spiritual connection to water and taught other species profound lessons about flow, adaptation, and the cyclical nature of existence. Their music could only be heard properly underwater and involved complex harmonic patterns that seemed to contain actual meaning. The fairies, standing 3 feet 6 inches to 4 feet 6 inches tall with delicate features, iridescent skin, and gossamer wings, the fairies were beings of pure creativity and magic. They existed partially in the normal world and partially in adjacent dimensional spaces where different physical laws applied. The fairies served as artists, gardeners, and illusionists throughout Atlantis. They tended to spaces where the boundary between dimensions was thin, cultivating gardens that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. They were tricksters and teachers, often conveying profound lessons through apparent jokes and games. The centaurs, standing 7 feet 0 inches to 8 feet 0 inches tall from hoof to head, with the lower body of a horse and upper body of a human, the centaurs were powerful and graceful beings of profound strength and wisdom. They originated from a world in the Antares system. The centaurs were warriors, philosophers, and healers. They understood balance between power and wisdom, strength and gentleness. They taught other species advanced martial arts and contributed deep understanding of the connection between physical and mental discipline. The dragons, the oldest species present in Atlantis, the dragons ranged from 15 feet to 50 feet in length, with scales of gold, silver, emerald, or sapphire. They possessed wings, claws, intelligence equal or superior to the most advanced species, and lifespans that stretched to thousands of years. The dragons were repositories of cosmic memory, capable of remembering events from millions of years ago with perfect clarity. They served as philosophers and advisors to all species, bringing perspective that came only from witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations. Dragons were territorial by nature and did not establish large settlements, but rather maintained individual sanctuaries where they meditated and recorded history. They were simultaneously feared and revered, viewed as the ultimate embodiment of power tempered by wisdom. The unicorns and pegasi, standing 6 feet 0 inches to 7 feet 0 at the shoulder with the body of a horse and either a single spiraling horn, unicorns, or functional wings, pegasi. These species were among the most rare and precious in Atlantis. Only a few hundred of each existed. These beings possessed a unique magical quality. Their mere presence seemed to elevate consciousness and reveal truth. They were symbols of hope and transcendence, and their appearance at significant events was considered profound blessing. The unicorns and pegasi did not contribute technology or science but rather wisdom and perspective. They served as living reminders of the existence of beauty and magic within the universe. The insectoids, ranging from humanoid insects standing 5 feet 6 inches to massive beings 8 feet 0 inches or taller, the insectoids possessed exoskeletons, multiple limbs, and compound eyes, granting them vision in spectrums invisible to most species. The insectoids understood complex systems and engineering with an intuitive grasp that other species had to learn through study. They engineered ecosystems with mathematical precision and contributed enormous amounts of technological innovation. Insectoid culture was based on cooperation and collective good. While they maintained individual consciousness and identity, they possessed a kind-of telepathic connection that allowed their society to function with remarkable coordination and efficiency. The kangaroo people, standing 5 feet 6 inches to 6 feet 6 inches with powerful hind legs, a flexible tail for balance, and smaller but highly functional arms, the kangaroo people were the fastest beings in Atlantis, capable of running at speeds exceeding 70 miles per hour. The kangaroo people served as messengers and explorers, discovering new regions and connecting distant communities. They brought energy and enthusiasm to any endeavor and contributed technologies for rapid transportation and communication. The elephant people, standing 8 feet 0 inches to 9 feet 0 inches tall with gray skin, long flexible trunks, large ears, and enormous strength, the elephant people were among the largest humanoid species in Atlantis. The elephant people were philosophers and teachers, possessing excellent memory and patience for detailed study. They contributed advanced understanding of memory systems and learning technologies. They were gentle despite their size and brought perspective on using great strength with gentleness and wisdom. The rodent folk, small creatures standing 3 feet 6 inches to 4 feet 6 inches tall with features reminiscent of various rodents, the rodent folk compensated for their physical fragility with incredible intelligence and ingenuity. They were master engineers and inventors. The rodent folk created many of the smaller, more elegant technologies in Atlantis. They understood mechanics and engineering with intuitive genius and could conceive of solutions that larger species would never imagine. The spider beings, humanoid beings with 8 limbs, 8 eyes, and the ability to produce silk, the spider beings standing 5 feet 6 inches to 6 feet 6 inches were master builders and weavers. They created vast networks of information and physical structures. The spider beings contributed advanced understanding of network systems, both physical and informational. They understood patterns and connections that other species often overlooked. The shadow people beings existing partially in normal space and partially in adjacent dimensional spaces, the shadow people were difficult to perceive and even harder to describe. They appeared as humanoid silhouettes with variable density, sometimes almost solid, sometimes barely visible. The shadow people were observers and keepers of secrets. They existed between worlds and taught other species about the nature of reality beyond the normal 3 dimensions. They were enigmatic and mysterious, and no other species truly understood their motivations or goals. The Sirius Avian Collective, a separate group from the Pleiades Avians, the Sirius Avians were large, eagle-like beings standing 7 feet 0 inches to 8 feet 0 inches tall with massive wings, powerful talons, and intelligence equal to the greatest scholars. The Sirius Avians were warriors and philosophers, understanding the balance between aggression and peace. They served as peacekeepers and brought military expertise to Atlantean defense systems. The Lyran felines, similar to but distinct from the cat people from Vega, the Lyran felines were larger, 6 feet 2 inches to 7 feet 0, more muscular, and possessed a fiercer appearance. Despite their warrior nature, they were refined and cultured. The Lyran felines contributed advanced understanding of combat, strategy, and defense. They established the warrior academies where beings could learn controlled aggression and discipline. The Andromedan Collective, a grouping of various humanoid species from the Andromeda Galaxy, the Andromedans were generally human-like in appearance but possessed unusual skin tones, blue, green, silver, gold, and various anatomical variations. The Andromedans brought diversity of perspective and contributed to cross-cultural understanding. They served as ambassadors and facilitators of cooperation between the more alien species and the human-derived species. The Sirius Amphibians, amphibious beings combining humanoid structure with aquatic adaptations, the Sirius Amphibians stood 5 feet 9 inches to 6 feet 6 inches and could breathe both air and water with equal facility. The Sirius Amphibians served as bridges between the aquatic fish people and the land-dwelling species. They contributed technologies and perspectives that synthesized the understanding of multiple environments. The Zeta Reticulans, small, 4 feet 0 inches to 4 feet 6 inches, gray-skinned beings with large eyes and small bodies, the Zeta Reticulans were often confused with the Asian Greys but were biologically distinct. They were expert mathematicians and physicists. The Zeta Reticulans contributed profound understanding of quantum mechanics and the nature of dimensional space. They developed many of the technologies that allowed Atlantis to maintain stability despite the extreme diversity of species and technology present. The Tau Cetians, aquatic beings from a water world orbiting Tau Ceti, the Tau Cetians appeared as humanoid cetaceans, dolphins and whales, standing 6 feet 0 inches to 8 feet 0 inches tall. They possessed echolocation and enhanced acoustic perception. The Tau Cetians were poets and musicians, understanding sound and vibration at profound levels. They contributed advanced communication systems and taught other species to perceive reality through sound rather than sight. The thought collective, a Gestalt consciousness comprising thousands of individual small beings, standing 2 feet 0 inches to 3 feet 0 inches tall, the thought collective operated as both group and individuals. Each member contained memories and consciousness of the collective while maintaining individual identity. The thought collective contributed unique problem-solving approaches and demonstrated that consciousness itself could be fundamentally different from the individual-based consciousness that most species assumed. The crystalline entities, silicon-based beings constructed of living crystal, the crystalline entities ranged from 5 feet 6 inches to 8 feet 0 in height. They did not have biological ancestry but rather had evolved spontaneously from crystalline structures in geothermal vents. The crystalline entities thought in timeframes of geological ages, bringing profound patience and long-term perspective. They understood geology and planetary science at levels that other species barely understood. The photonic intelligences, beings of pure energy maintaining humanoid form through force of will. The photonic intelligences could appear as beings of pure light standing 6 feet 0 inches to 7 feet 0 inches tall. They required significant energy but could exist in forms other species could barely perceive. The photonic intelligences contributed the most advanced energy technology and could perceive and manipulate reality at fundamental levels. They taught other species that consciousness itself was ultimately a form of energy. The gaseous collective sentient beings of atmospheric gas, clouds that had achieved consciousness, the gaseous collective maintained humanoid form only when interacting with solid matter species. They existed as vast clouds in the upper atmosphere. The gaseous collective understood weather systems, atmospheric dynamics, and large-scale planetary processes. They served as keepers of the atmosphere and contributed to maintaining Atlantis's climate and weather patterns. The dimensional shifters, beings capable of existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. The dimensional shifters appeared as humanoid figures with visible outlines that seemed to fluctuate slightly. They stood approximately 6 feet 0 inches to 6 feet 6 inches tall. The dimensional shifters contributed understanding of higher dimensional physics and demonstrated that reality was far more flexible than most species realized. The sonic collective beings evolved from standing sound waves rather than matter. The sonic collective maintained humanoid form through pure vibrational patterns. They stood approximately 6 feet 0 inches to 7 feet 0 inches tall and appeared as humanoid shapes of visible sound. The sonic collective understood consciousness, vibration, and the fundamental relationship between thought and reality at levels that other species barely comprehended. The temporal merchants, a mysterious species capable of perceiving and moving through time in ways other species could not. The temporal merchants appeared human in form but with subtle differences that suggested they existed at a slightly different point in time. The temporal merchants contributed unique technologies related to energy storage and temporal mechanics. They served as consultants on matters requiring the longest possible perspective. The Void Walkers, the least understood of all species, the Void Walkers appeared as humanoid beings surrounded by an aura of absolute darkness, not shadow, but the complete absence of light. They stood approximately 6 feet 0 inches to 7 feet 0 inches tall. The Void Walkers brought perspective from the spaces between existence and non-existence. They taught other species about the nature of emptiness and the profound power of nothingness. Part 3. The Atlantean technology. With 37 species collaborating, the technological civilization of Atlantis had reached staggering heights. The technologies themselves fell into several categories. Energy systems. The foundation of Atlantean civilization was energy technology that produced abundant power without depletion or pollution. Etheric accumulators, spheres of crystalline matter that drew energy directly from Earth's electromagnetic field and solar radiation. A single device could power an entire city. Harmonic resonance batteries, devices that stored energy by maintaining matter in a state of perpetual vibration at specific frequencies. Energy could be released by altering the harmonic pattern. Consciousness-coupled generators, devices that powered themselves from the focused intention of a trained operator. The more peaceful and harmonious the operator's consciousness, the more energy could be generated. Geothermal tap-ins, direct access to Earth's internal heat through drilling techniques and crystalline conduits that could withstand any temperature. Stellar energy transmission, the ability to receive energy directly from stars through vast crystalline receiver arrays positioned in high mountains and orbiting the planet. Transportation movement throughout Atlantis was seamless, gravity-neutral platforms, vehicles that moved through the air by altering local gravitational fields, allowing movement in any direction without friction or aerodynamic limitations. Teleportation portals, permanent gateways between major cities that could transfer physical matter across any distance instantaneously, provided that matter had been attuned to the portal's frequency. Dimensional transit, travel through adjacent dimensional spaces that allowed covering vast distances by moving briefly into higher dimensional spaces. Thought vehicles, craft controlled entirely by concentrated intention, responding to the pilot's will as directly as their own body. Communication information moved instantaneously throughout Atlantis. Consciousness networks, devices allowing direct mind-to-mind communication across any distance, with the ability to share emotions, memories, and sensory experiences. Harmonic transmission, information encoded in sound frequencies that could propagate through any medium, including stone, air, and water. Stellar relays, vast crystalline structures in orbit around Earth that received and transmitted signals from other star systems. Medical technology. Disease and aging were largely solved. Cellular reconstruction chambers, devices that could scan a being's body for damage or disease and restore it to perfect health, even regrowing lost limbs or organs. Consciousness preservation, the ability to transfer consciousness between bodies, backup consciousness for immortality, or maintain consciousness outside a physical body. Genetic optimization, techniques to optimize genetic expression without violation of the being's essential nature or free will. Pain elimination, devices that could eliminate suffering by blocking pain signals without affecting sensory perception. Manufacturing resources were generated with efficiency unimaginable in later eras. Matter synthesis, devices that could convert raw atomic matter into any configuration desired, creating objects from raw elements with perfect precision. Biological manufacturing, living organisms designed to produce specific materials, from metals to medicines to complex structures. Probability engines, devices that could influence probability to increase the likelihood of encountering rare materials or conditions. Environmental control. The planet itself was managed for optimal flourishing. Climate regulation, vast crystalline matrices in the planetary mantle that stabilized temperature, prevented ice ages and extreme heat, and maintained optimal atmospheric composition. Biological balance management, computational systems that monitored all life and could adjust population levels to prevent any species from overwhelming its ecosystem. Earthquake prevention, devices that could regulate tectonic stress and prevent the buildup of pressure that caused earthquakes. Part 4. The government and politics. Atlantis was governed by a complex system that attempted to give voice to all species and individuals. The Council of Races. The governing body of Atlantis consisted of representatives from all 37 species. Each species selected representatives through their own internal processes, ensuring diversity of perspective within each species delegation. The council operated through consensus, with extensive discussion and debate before decisions were made. This created a slow process, but one that had preserved peace for thousands of years. The hierarchical layers beneath the council, governance was distributed at multiple levels. Planetary level, issues affecting all species and the entire planet were decided by the full council. Regional level, the 5 dominant races held regional authority over their territories, with representation from other species resident in their regions. City level, individual cities were governed by their dominant species with input from minority communities. Community level, individual communities largely governed themselves, with the larger structures providing only framework and dispute resolution. Legal systems. Atlantis did not have a unified legal code, recognizing that beings of radically different natures required different frameworks. Restorative justice, the dominant approach was to restore harm rather than punish offenders. A being who damaged another was obligated to repair that damage. Species-specific justice, when beings of different species had disputes, the justice system would employ mediators from neutral species. Education and rehabilitation, individuals who violated laws were required to undergo intensive education to understand why their actions were harmful. Part 5. The Knowledge Wars. The breakdown of Atlantean civilization was not sudden but gradual, resulting from systemic failures, racial tensions, and the increasing power of dangerous technologies that tempted those who possessed them. The first signs. Approximately 50 years before the continent's fall, tensions began to manifest. Resource competition. The Indo believed that the Atlanteans were using more than their fair share of the planet's resources through their consciousness network, which required vast amounts of energy. Immigration disputes. As populations grew, conflicts arose over territory. Some species wanted to expand their regions, others wanted to restrict immigration. Technology inequality. The tall whites had developed weapons far more advanced than other species possessed, creating resentment and fear. Ideological divergence. The Atlanteans increasingly promoted their philosophy of guided ascension, believing they should direct the development of lesser species. This appalled the more egalitarian races. The first conflicts. Rather than physical warfare, conflicts began in the realm of knowledge and ideology. The library conflicts. Different species began hiding knowledge from one another, fearing that critical technologies might fall into wrong hands. The network schism. Some species began disconnecting from the consciousness network, creating separate networks and creating information barriers. The prophecy wars. Intellectuals from different species began interpreting the dragon's prophecies in contradictory ways, with each faction claiming that the dragons had supported their worldview. The technology acceleration. Each faction, fearing being left behind by the others, began to rapidly develop weapons and power sources, creating an arms race that spiraled out of control. The Atlantean supremacist movement, a movement emerged among radical Atlanteans who believed that their species was meant to guide the development of all others. They proposed policies of forced integration, requiring individuals from other species to undergo genetic modification to become more like Atlanteans. Consciousness hierarchy, positioning Atlantean consciousness as the apex toward which other species should aspire. Forced separation, restricting mixing between species, fearing that hybrids might dilute Atlantean purity. This movement was opposed by many Atlanteans, but it gained political power through increasingly authoritarian governance structures. The Earthling Underground. In response, the Earthlings began organizing an underground network, helping beings of all species to escape Atlantean territories and preserve ancient knowledge in hidden locations. They created the first archives of freedom, libraries hidden in the deep forest where knowledge could be preserved outside the Atlantean network. The Gray calculation problem. The Asian Greys, attempting to maintain their traditional role as neutral administrators, began to calculate the probability of future conflict. Their calculations showed an increasingly high probability of catastrophic war if current trends continued. Rather than sharing these concerning projections, some radical Greys began working on weapons that could rebalance the distribution of power. They created the first probability bombs, weapons that could artificially collapse probability fields and cause physical collapse in localized regions. The tall white preemptive strikes. Fearing that the other races were developing weapons they couldn't defend against, the tall whites launched preemptive strikes against known weapons development facilities. These strikes were intended to be surgical, targeting only military installations. However, the devastation was enormous. Several cities were damaged, and thousands of innocent civilians were killed. This shattered any remaining trust between the races. The final escalation in the last years before the fall, all pretense of legal and orderly governance collapsed. Military takeovers. Each of the 5 dominant races took military control of their territories. Knowledge destruction. Systematic burning of libraries and archives, with each race attempting to destroy knowledge that other races might use against them. Weapon proliferation. Development of increasingly catastrophic weapons. Alliance shifting. Smaller races were forced to choose sides in conflicts they had no part in creating. The prophecy fulfilled. In desperation, different factions activated ancient weapons and devices that had been kept sealed because they were understood to be too dangerous for conscious use. The prophecy warnings were ignored in the rush to gain military advantage. The final days in the last week of Atlantis, all 5 dominant races activated their most powerful weapons simultaneously. The Atlanteans activated a device called the Stellar Collapse Array, which could collapse the binding energy holding matter together in localized regions. The Earthlings triggered the Biosphere Cascade, a device designed to cause uncontrolled growth in all plant life, overwhelming infrastructure. The Indo detonated the Harmonic Resonance Reversal, which inverted all harmonic patterns, causing structures tuned to specific frequencies to collapse. The Tall Whites activated the Gravitational Inversion Matrix, causing localized gravity to invert randomly, destroying any structure not specifically hardened against such effects. The Asian Greys unleashed the Probability Collapse Cascade, causing probability itself to become unstable in wide regions. The planet could not withstand the onslaught. The carefully balanced climate regulation systems failed as their crystalline matrices shattered. The planetary stabilization matrices in the mantle underwent catastrophic failure. The tectonic plates, held in check for millennia, suddenly lurched and shifted. Massive earthquakes tore apart the continent. Volcanoes erupted with unprecedented fury. The ocean rose in devastating tsunamis. The sky filled with ash and toxic gases. In 7 days, over 2 billion sentient beings died. Part 6. The Exodus and Aftermath. The escape. As the continent crumbled, desperate refugees fled. The Tall Whites and Atlanteans, with access to their advanced technology, managed to evacuate significant populations to orbital platforms and to other planets. The Earthlings, with their understanding of biological systems, preserved seeds and genetic material for all plants and many animals, storing them in underground vaults. The Asian Greys created temporal stasis fields, preserving knowledge and some populations in frozen time. The Indo, understanding harmonic principles, created dimensional pockets where small populations could survive. The other races scattered, some returning to their home worlds, others fleeing to remote parts of Earth. The submersion within hours, the ocean fully reclaimed the land. The Atlantic Ocean, which had been a river valley between two continents, became a genuine ocean separating the Americas from Europe and Africa. The massive continent that had been Atlantis was gone, drowned beneath miles of dark water. Some technologies were activated in their final moments, creating underwater cities in deep ocean trenches that would operate for centuries before finally failing. The diaspora of the survivors spread across the world. Atlantean survivors fled to Europe, the Mediterranean, and North Africa, where they established settlements that would grow into later civilizations. Some merged with local human populations, others attempted to maintain genetic purity, creating isolated bloodlines. Earthling survivors spread throughout Africa and later migrated to all continents, carrying their botanical knowledge and integrating with indigenous human populations. Indo survivors returned to Asia and also migrated to the Americas, where they established settlements that would influence indigenous cultures. Tall white survivors established hidden bases in remote locations, the Arctic, high mountains, and deep ocean trenches, where they could preserve their technological achievements. Asian gray survivors returned to their orbital stations and eventually to their home star system, though maintaining periodic observation of Earth. The knowledge lost, the destruction was not merely physical, it was intellectual. Libraries burned or sank. Consciousness network backups were destroyed. Individuals carrying specific knowledge perished. Survivors were traumatized and fragmented, losing the coherence necessary to maintain advanced civilization. Within generations, the knowledge of Atlantean technology was lost. What remained were fragments, myths, legends, and occasional archaeological finds that humans could not explain. The genetic legacy, however, the survivors' genetic material remained. Every human carried within them the genetic legacy of Atlantis. Atlantean genetics provided unusual talents for architecture and mathematics. Earthling genetics provided connection to nature and biological understanding. Indo-genetics provided sensitivity to geometric patterns and harmonic frequencies. Tall white and Asian gray genetics expressed only rarely, hiding within recessive genes until the right conditions emerged. The human species became, in essence, a hybrid carrying the potential of all five dominant races. This potential could be awakened, but would require the conditions of peace and cooperation that the ancient world had failed to maintain. Watching the races that had fled Atlantis never completely abandoned Earth. They maintained observation posts in orbit and scattered across the galaxy. The Pleiadians in particular maintained a consistent presence, watching humanity and occasionally intervening with subtle guidance. The prophecy was not forgotten. It was recorded, preserved, and passed down through the cosmic community. And Earth Watchers waited, patient across millennia, for the conditions that would allow humanity to awaken to its true nature. Part 7. The Galactic Federation and the New Order. Formation of the Federation. In the aftermath of Atlantis' destruction, the races that had participated came together in profound reckoning. They had failed their responsibilities. They had abandoned a developing species to chaos. They carried responsibility for the deaths of billions. This reckoning led to the formation of the Galactic Federation, a government established with explicit principles, the prime directive of ethical intervention. The Federation vowed that never again would they withdraw from a developing world in a way that risked genocide or civilizational collapse. The principle of non-coercive contact. The Federation established that contact with developing species should be offered but never forced. A species must choose to join the community. The Knowledge Preservation Protocol. The Federation would maintain repositories of knowledge from all species, ensuring that if a civilization fell, the knowledge would be preserved for future recovery. The Temporal Safeguard. The Federation developed protocols to monitor probability streams and prevent catastrophic futures when possible. The Equality Compact. All species, regardless of technological advancement, would have equal voice in Federation governance. The Federation's structure. The Galactic Federation established a complex structure, the Council of Races. Representatives from all member species met in regular session to discuss and resolve interspecies issues. The Knowledge Keepers. A dedicated group of races whose primary responsibility was maintaining libraries of knowledge from all civilizations. The Temporal Guard. a specialized core with access to temporal technology, monitoring probability streams to prevent catastrophic futures. The contact protocol, specialists trained in ethical first contact, waiting for the moment when each developing species expressed readiness for larger civilization. The Conservation Consortium, races dedicated to preserving the biological and genetic diversity of all worlds. The prophecy and its interpretation. The Federation gave serious consideration to the dragon's final prophecy. Different factions interpreted it differently. The literalists believed that Atlantis would physically rise from the ocean in some future time. The spiritualists believed that Atlantis referred to a state of consciousness that humanity would eventually achieve. The geneticists believed that the prophecy referred to the genetic awakening of humanity's latent Atlantean heritage. The cosmicists believed that the prophecy meant that the scattered races of Atlantis would reunify at a higher level of evolution. In fact, elements of all interpretations would prove correct. The Watcher's role. The Federation established a permanent watching presence on and around Earth, orbital stations, hidden in dimensional folds and quantum probability clouds. Massive monitoring stations tracked all of humanity's development. Ground operatives, carefully selected individuals from various species, incarnated as humans or hidden in remote locations, served as observers and occasionally as guides. Genetic monitors, specialists tracked the expression of Atlantean genetic material within humanity, watching for the emergence of individuals with unusual abilities or consciousness. Prophetic monitors, spiritual experts from many species watched for signs that humanity was approaching the conditions described in the dragon's prophecy. Part 8. The present day. 400 years later. The current situation, May 30, 2026, 4 centuries after the fall of Atlantis, humanity has reached a critical juncture. Technology has advanced to levels that approach some, but not all, of Atlantean capabilities. The Internet provides rudimentary consciousness networking, though primitive compared to Atlantean systems. Renewable energy technologies are finally emerging. Medical science has advanced to impressive levels. But more significantly, humanity's consciousness is changing. Emergence of awakened individuals, scattered across the world. Individuals are beginning to remember, in dreams, visions, and sudden knowledge, fragments of Atlantean life. Some display latent Atlantean abilities, the ability to influence probability, to sense electromagnetic fields, to heal others, to speak across telepathic networks. Rising spiritual movements. Many of Earth's contemporary spiritual movements are, unknowingly, echoing Atlantean philosophy and practice. Consciousness studies, sacred geometry, energy healing, environmental activism, and the search for unity consciousness are all expressions of humanity's genetic memory of Atlantis. Technology approaching danger threshold. Humanity has developed nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and nanotechnology. If weaponized without wisdom, these could devastate the planet as thoroughly as the ancient weapons once did. Growing awareness of cosmic context, UFO disclosures, channeled information, and scientific discoveries are increasing humanity's awareness that we are not alone. The question is no longer, are there aliens, but, how do we relate to them? The coming moment. The Federation and its watchers believe that humanity is approaching the critical moment described in the prophecy, the waters that divided. The metaphorical ocean of separation between humanity and the cosmic community is thinning. The scattered five, the genetic descendants of the 5 dominant Atlantean races, are preparing to remember their unity. The recognition. Humanity is beginning to recognize the cosmic family that has always been watching. The choice. Humanity now faces a choice that will determine our future, the path of continuation. Continue current patterns of conflict, competition, and limited consciousness. This path leads inevitably to catastrophic war and potential extinction. The probability is calculated at 67%. The path of awakening. Embrace the possibility that we carry Atlantean heritage, that our true nature is cosmic, that we are meant for cooperation with the vast intelligent life of the universe. This path leads to transformation, integration with the Federation, and the beginning of the new Atlantis. The probability is calculated at 29%. The unknown path. Some possibilities exist outside normal probability calculation, suggesting that entirely unexpected futures remain possible. The probability is calculated at 4%. The Federation's current actions at present. The Federation is increasing contact. Careful, non-coercive contact is becoming more frequent. Individuals around the world are experiencing encounters and revelations. Activating Atlantean genetics. Individuals with the strongest Atlantean heritage are being activated, awakening to their full potential and their memories of the ancient world. Building alliances. Key human leaders, scientists, and spiritual teachers are being subtly guided toward decisions that reduce existential risk. Preserving knowledge. Information about Atlantis is being carefully released to humanity, allowing them to integrate the knowledge of their true history. Waiting for critical mass. Once enough humans are awakened and enough choose the path of Atlantean reunion, the Federation can offer formal contact and integration. Part 9. The Prophecy. Full text and interpretation. The dragons spoke this prophecy in their final moment on Atlantis, as the continent sank into the sea. It has been preserved in perfect form across 4 centuries, though its meaning has been debated endlessly. The original words, "When the waters that divided become bridges once more, when the scattered 5 remember they were one, when the children of earth look to the stars not with fear but recognition, when knowledge is sought not for power but for unity, when the warrior becomes the sage and the sage becomes the warrior, when the heart of stone beats once again with the pulse of the living earth, when the small are honored as deeply as the great, when the boundaries between beings bertumter and specken, when hotjanners and townships emerge into them from speckeren, then shall the exiled return, bearing the knowledge that was lost. Then shall Atlantis rise not from the depths, but in the hearts of those who choose to build it anew. Then shall the scattered family be whole. Then shall the experiment that failed once succeed, built not on pride and hierarchy, but on true union. Then shall the prophecy complete itself. 7 interpretations. The physical interpretation. The Atlantic Ocean will somehow drain or recede, allowing Atlantis to be physically excavated and reclaimed. The gates refer to actual portals that will be reopened. This interpretation is held by 15% of Federation philosophers and is viewed as the least likely. The spiritual interpretation. Atlantis refers to a state of consciousness that humanity will achieve through spiritual development. The gates are metaphorical portals in the mind. The scattered 5 are the 5 aspects of integrated consciousness. This interpretation is held by 35% of Federation philosophers and is viewed as highly probable. The genetic interpretation. The Atlantean genetic heritage will be fully expressed in humanity, granting humans access to abilities that have been dormant. The scattered 5 refers to the 5 genetic lineages that must be reintegrated. The gates are the unlock mechanisms that will allow full genetic expression. This interpretation is held by 25% of Federation philosophers and is viewed as very probable. The technological interpretation. Humanity will develop technologies equivalent to those of Atlantis, allowing them to restore the planet and take their place in the cosmic community. This interpretation is held by 18% of Federation philosophers and is viewed as partially probable. The technology can be rebuilt but must be accompanied by spiritual and consciousness development. The cosmic interpretation. The prophecy refers to the eventual reunion of all matter and consciousness in the universe, with Atlantis serving as a metaphor for the ultimately unified reality toward which all existence tends. This interpretation is held by 4% of Federation philosophers and is viewed as metaphysically sophisticated but perhaps overly abstract. The cyclical interpretation. Atlantis represents a level of development that civilizations repeatedly achieve and then destroy, until they finally achieve it with true wisdom. The prophecy describes the moment when a civilization finally breaks the cycle and sustains itself. This interpretation is held by 2% of Federation philosophers and aligns with certain mathematical models of civilization development. The integrated interpretation. The most likely interpretation, that the prophecy describes all of these phenomena occurring simultaneously. Genetic memory awakens, spiritual consciousness expands, technologies are rebuilt, contact is made with the cosmic family, and humanity makes the choice to transcend conflict. This interpretation is held by 1% of Federation philosophers but is gradually gaining acceptance as humanity's actual development seems to align with multiple aspects of the prophecy simultaneously. Part 10. The road ahead. Scenarios and probabilities. The Federation has calculated multiple possible futures based on current conditions. Scenario 1. Transcendence. Probability, 29%. Humanity awakens to its cosmic nature, integrates with the Galactic Federation, and begins the process of rebuilding Atlantean civilization consciously and wisely. Technology and spirituality advance together. Conflict is transcended. Humanity becomes a truly spacefaring species and takes its place among the stars. Timeline: 50 to 150 years. Scenario 2, managed transition, probability, 18%. Slow, careful contact between humanity and the Federation leads to gradual integration. There are some conflicts and resistance, but eventually, the weight of evidence and the benefits of contact overcome fear and resistance. Humanity advances steadily toward Federation membership. Timeline: 150 to 300 years. Scenario 3, delayed awakening, probability, 19%. Humanity resists contact and continues in relative isolation for several more centuries. However, continuing environmental crisis and resource scarcity eventually force the choice to either accept Federation help or face extinction. Eventually, awakening occurs. Timeline: 200 to 500 years. Scenario 4, catastrophic collapse, probability, 21%. Humanity's conflicts escalate to nuclear or biological warfare, potentially triggering civilizational collapse. The Federation must choose between Prime Directive non-interference and the need to prevent extinction-level disaster. There is intervention, but at enormous human cost. Timeline: 10 to 50 years to collapse, 100 to 300 years to recovery. Scenario 5, silent extinction, probability, 8%. Humanity gradually undermines its own biological basis through environmental destruction, genetic degradation, or conscious self-termination. The prophecy is never fulfilled. The Federation preserves human genetic material and consciousness backups but must rebuild humanity from scratch in some distant future. Timeline: 50 to 200 years to extinction. Scenario 6, unexpected futures, probability, 5%. Quantum probability and genuine free will create possibilities that even the Federation's sophisticated temporal calculators cannot predict. Novel solutions, surprising alliances, or entirely unexpected developments could lead to outcomes not covered by current probability models. Timeline: Variable Part 11, the sign and the beckoning. Currently, the Federation is increasing its signals to humanity. The sign's ancient sites reactivating. Some of the ancient Atlantean sites on the ocean floor are beginning to emit signals, as if waking from a long sleep. Genetic awakening. Young people born in the last few decades are displaying abilities and knowledge their genetic ancestry cannot explain. Technological breakthroughs. Rapid advancement in quantum computing, renewable energy, and medical technology suggests that genetic memory is guiding human innovation toward Atlantean-level capabilities. Spiritual convergence. Religions and spiritual traditions across the world are increasingly discovering common ground and similar core teachings, expressions of the unified consciousness that Atlantean spirituality once embodied. UFO disclosure. Governments worldwide are gradually releasing information about non-human intelligence, preparing the collective consciousness for formal contact. Mathematical convergence. Advanced mathematical and physics research is converging on principles that, when fully understood, will provide the theoretical foundation for building Atlantean-level technology again. The message the Federation sends to awakening humans is simple: you are not alone. You never have been alone. Your ancestors walked among stars. You carry within you the potential to rebuild what was lost and create something greater. But the choice must be yours. We will not force awakening or contact. We will not assume authority over your destiny. When you are ready, the gates will open. When you choose unity over conflict, the exiled will return. When you recognize yourselves as cosmic beings on a cosmic journey, Atlantis will rise again, not as a location but as a state of consciousness, a way of being, a commitment to building civilization on truth and unity. The only question is, will you choose this path? Conclusion: Atlantis Ascending. The new legend of Atlantis is not complete. It is, even now, being written by choices made in billions of human hearts and minds. The old Atlantis fell because the races that built it could not resolve their conflicts. The new Atlantis will be built, if it is built, by humans who integrate all the Atlantean wisdom without repeating the mistakes. The genetics that brought creativity, practical wisdom, harmonic understanding, computational intelligence, and grounded connection to Earth will be consciously integrated rather than divided. The prophecy was spoken by dragons who saw both the tragedy of what was and the potential of what could be. The Federation watches and waits. The scattered races of Atlantis dream of reunion. And all across Earth, individuals are beginning to awaken, to remember, to hear the call of the stars that their ancestors once walked. The age of division ends. The age of reunion approaches. Atlantis calls from the future, not the past. And the only question remaining is, who will answer the call?